Hi everybody, welcome to CS Analytical. For those who aren't familiar, CS Analytical is a CGMP FDA registered contract laboratory, and we exclusively focus on container and package system qualification. So really our services are set up with the intention of taking that package system from concept to commercial. So whether that's looking at polymers, different materials of construction from the physical chemical standpoint, extractions, etc., or the fit and finish of those components as they're assembled into a package system, or moving forward from that, even secondary, tertiary packaging as may be relevant in, let's say, distribution simulation. So for the purposes of today, we're just going to do a little bit of a lab tour. I'll give you an idea of who we are, what we do, a little bit how our processes flow in our facility, and I appreciate your time and attention. So from where we're standing, you can see about 80% of the laboratory. On this side over here is all of our physical functional type testing. That includes things like dimensional analyses, container closure integrity, Instron functionality. All of that's located on this side of the lab. And then on that side of the lab is all of our physical chemical type capabilities. So all of our chemistry, things like extractions, identification, etc., happens on that side of the laboratory. And so what we'll do today is a little bit of a loop around the lab. I'll introduce you to some of our equipment and capabilities, and we'll go from there. So behind me over here, this is our warehouse. We do have both a side door for hand deliveries and a loading bay for truck deliveries, palletized shipments, large pieces of equipment, etc. Most of our shipments come via UPS, FedEx, custom courier, always dependent on our client and their preferred courier of choice. However, the first step when we receive any package here at CSA is to inspect it, open it, and determine if it's a supply or a sample. If it's a supply that we use for most of the testing we perform on site, it's placed in the warehouse on our supply receipt shelf until it is formally intaken and released to the lab for use. If it is in fact a sample that is received, we go through an entirely different process for sample traceability that's referred to as our sample intake process. If the shipment is in fact a sample, that sample would get placed on the incoming sample receipt shelf before being processed and fully intaken for the lab. So as an example here, I have a bag of plastic bottles, a very typical sample, and some samples inside of a box. So our intake process is entirely electronic. When we issue a quotation for services, the client has the opportunity to review that quotation electronically, accept that quotation electronically, and then fill out our electronic sample submission form. A sample submission form is a common part of submitting samples to a CGMP laboratory, and it helps us ensure that what we're receiving is properly identified, that the tests are properly, that we've chosen the proper tests to run on that sample, and that all of the identifying information is in accordance with the client's expectations for our quality purposes. During our intake process, there are a few critical steps. The first part is, of course, to ensure that the condition of the sample as received is appropriate. So if we note any damage, etc., during that intake process, we would alert the client before proceeding with testing. The rest of the intake process really has to do with traceability, making sure that we have that sample properly identified, properly stored, and that it gets properly tested and reported as is the expectation. So when we perform intake, there's a few steps that happen. Each sample receives a photograph at the time of receipt. So this box, as it's received and its contents, will be captured in a photo that becomes part of the intake record. We also print these labels for each project. And on each label, there are a few pieces of relevant information. This number here is our internal project number. That project number lives with this project from the point of it being quoted to the point of it being reported and invoiced. So this number travels with this project from start to finish. Within this project, though, we might have multiple samples. I might have a bottle and a cap, or a syringe barrel and a plunger, for example. So each individual component or sample that is going to be part of that project also receives its own unique ID. So in this case, you can see that we have both .1 and .2. In this particular case, that corresponds to the cap and the bottle, which will be put together and tested for certain tests, but also individually tested for other tests. Another example here is our large bag of bottles, and very similarly you can see that there is a project number. This particular project number only has one sample, so there is no need for bifurcation of those project numbers. We also have the storage location that it is assigned. So if we do receive samples that just require ambient storage, we keep them in our secure sample cage over here with numbered shelves that are assigned for each project where that sample should live when not being tested. If we do in fact have any need for controlled condition storage, whether that's 2 to 8 refrigerated, -20, et cetera, we also have a range of chambers throughout the laboratory to be able to accommodate those storage conditions. If in fact I did receive a sample that needs to be stored at a special condition, we, instead of placing the shelf number, we would be placing the asset ID, what we call the equipment record, or ER, of the chamber that those samples would be stored in. So the sample would be labeled, and then our system would retain all of that information about who intook it, when, the quantity and condition of the samples, and where they will be stored for the analysts to go and retrieve them for testing.